All right, so you want to know more about who's actually buying electric vehicles? Well, today we're gonna dig into that, and we're
Yeah.
gonna look at some pretty cool research that came out recently.
Some fascinating research. It really is a really interesting time for the EV market.
It is.
But to fully understand it, I think we need to understand the people driving that growth, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. So, the main source that we're going to be looking at today is a study that came out in June of this year
hmm
from a journal called Transport Policy.
Yes.
And the title is pretty straightforward. Who is more likely to buy electric vehicles?
Yeah, they cut right to the chase.
Yeah, they do. But what we're going to do in this deep dive today is kind of unpack what this research tells us and maybe challenge some of your preconceived notions.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really cool about this particular study is that it goes beyond just the simple demographics like age and income.
Right.
It really tries to get into the psychology
Yeah.
of potential EV buyers.
Yeah.
Looks at their environmental attitudes, their purchasing preferences, how they respond to information.
Okay. So one of the main things that they talk about in this study is this thing called
The climate change stage of change.
yes.
Or CCSOC for short.
Yeah, CC. So, I mean, it sounds a little technical.
It does. It does. It's a little jargony. But essentially what it's measuring is where someone is on this spectrum of climate action.
Okay.
So are they just kind of starting to think about climate change?
Mm.
Are they really worried about it? Or are they actually taking concrete steps to reduce their emissions?
Right. So, like, are you just reading about it on Twitter, or are you actually like composting? Are you cutting down on flights?
Exactly. And what the researchers found is that people who are further along on that stage of change, meaning they're already taking action, those folks are way more likely to choose an electric vehicle. In fact, I think it was 64%, a full 64% of the sample they used in this study were already actively reducing their emissions or had really concrete plans to do so. Yeah. So if you're already making these, eco-friendly choices in other areas of your life, then an electric vehicle just kind of seems like a natural next step.
Right. It's like walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, that actually kind of leads us to another one of the really interesting things that they use in this study, this idea of accumulated local effects,
Okay.
or ALE. I
Yeah.
know, another acronym, bear with me.
Right.
But it's a really powerful tool because it lets you visualize how these individual factors we've been talking about.
Okay.
So, the CCSO, price sensitivity, how these actually influence someone's likelihood of buying an EV.
Gotcha. So we're not just looking at these factors like on their own,
Right.
but how they actually play out in the real world.
Exactly. So, for example, we know that price is a huge consideration for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, of course.
But with ALE, we can actually see how that price sensitivity changes depending on someone's level of environmental concern.
Oh, interesting. So you're saying how much you care about the environment actually impacts how much you're willing to pay for an EV.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Mm.
And the results were fascinating. So for people who aren't really all that worried about climate change, the price of an EV is a major, major factor in their decision. They just want to get the most bang for their buck, just like with any other purchase.
Right. Which do sense, right? If saving the planet isn't your number one concern, then you're probably going to go with the most affordable option, right?
Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. So as someone's concern about climate change increases, their willingness to pay for an EV actually also goes up. So they're less focused on getting the cheapest model, and they're more interested in getting one that aligns with their values, even if it means spending a little bit more upfront.
Wow. So it's like they're willing to actually put their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. And ALE just lets us see that dynamic in a really clear visual way.
I love it. Okay. So before we get too deep into ALE, I want to circle back for a second.
Okay.
One of the findings in the study that really surprised me was that people who don't already own a car
Yes.
are actually more likely to go electric for their first vehicle.
I know. It's counterintuitive, isn't it?
It is. I mean, why do you think that is?
It's a great question. And to be honest, it's one that researchers are still trying to fully understand. But, it suggests that there's something about being new to car ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're just more open to new technologies, less tied to those traditional gasoline-powered vehicles. Maybe you're just less resistant to change.
Yeah. And maybe you also, you don't have this like preconceived notion of what a car should be. You're not comparing it to that like old gas guzzler you had for years.
Yeah. You're starting with a clean slate,
Right.
in a way. And speaking of starting fresh, let's talk about how the researchers actually tested different ways of presenting information about EV emissions.
Oh, you mean like those fuel efficiency stickers you see on new cars?
Exactly. Exactly. So they wanted to see if the way that information was framed would actually influence people's choices.
Okay.
And what they found was that labels showing, things like leafy trees,
Yeah.
emphasizing the positive environmental impact of EVs, like how they contribute to cleaner air,
Yeah.
those labels were way more effective at swaying people toward EVs than just your standard labels.
Wow. So it's not just about giving people the information, it's about how you present it.
It really is. It's about tapping into their emotions,
Yeah.
their values, their desire to have a positive impact.
It's about storytelling.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we're going to see more and more of as the EV market continues to evolve.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so we've got people's environmental values influencing their choices. We've got this really interesting way of visualizing all these influences with ALE.
Hmm.
And we've got the power of storytelling coming into play.
Yeah,
This is getting good.
it is. But we're just getting started. Let's dig a bit deeper into how ALE can help us understand some of the nuances of the EV market.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm ready to see what else we can unpack here.
All right. Remember how we were talking about how much you care about the environment and how that affects how much you're willing to pay for an EV? Well, ALE really lets us see that play out in a really cool way.
Oh, yeah, ALE. I'm excited to hear about this.
It paints a fascinating picture.
Okay, I'm picturing a canvas.
All right, so imagine a graph, okay?
Okay.
On one axis, you've got the price difference between, let's say, a battery electric vehicle, a BEV,
Mm-hmm.
and a similar gas-powered car.
Gotcha.
And on the other axis, you've got the likelihood of someone choosing the BEV.
Okay, so as the price difference gets bigger, you'd expect fewer people to pick the BEV, right?
You would think that.
Yeah.
But for people who are super worried about climate change, something really interesting happens.
Okay.
The likelihood of buying a BEV actually goes up as that price difference increases.
Wait, hold on. So the more expensive the BEV is compared to a gas guzzler,
Ah.
the more likely they are to buy it.
At least up to a point.
That's so counterintuitive.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it kind of suggests that they're not just looking for any electric vehicle.
Right.
They want the one that's going to make the biggest difference for the planet, even if it costs a little more.
So it's almost like they're making a statement
Exactly.
of their purchase, right? Like, I'm putting my money where my values are.
They're willing to pay a premium to align their actions with their values.
Totally. And ALE, like, makes this so clear.
It does, yeah.
Okay.
Here's where it gets even wilder, okay? So even for the most eco-conscious buyers, there seems to be a limit.
Oh, really?
The researchers found that for people who are extremely worried about climate change, there's a point where that price sensitivity starts to creep back in.
So even the most die-hard environmentalists have a budget.
It appears so.
Uh-huh.
And, it might have something to do with those really, really high-end EVs
Right.
with, like, all the bells and whistles and the latest tech being the priciest ones.
Yeah, so maybe even if your heart is set on saving the planet, your wallet might have a different opinion?
You got it. And that just highlights how important it is to keep driving down the cost of EVs, especially for those models with the most advanced, the most eco-friendly technology.
Yeah. It's a balancing act, for sure. Making sure EVs are accessible to everyone while still pushing the boundaries on innovation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've been talking about ALE and how it helps us understand price sensitivity. But what about, the other factors like car ownership? I mean, we already know that folks without a car are more likely to go electric, but are there any other, like, nuggets of wisdom that ALE can give us about this?
There are. So it turns out that age plays a really fascinating role here.
Okay.
So that tendency to go electric for a first car,
Mm-hmm.
that's especially strong amongst younger people.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, they've grown up with climate change being a constant topic of conversation.
Yeah.
They're more likely to be aware of the environmental impact of their choices.
Right, they're digital natives,
Yeah.
comfortable with new tech, maybe a little less attached to the idea of a traditional car.
So maybe they're also just tired of hearing about how their generation is going to inherit a messed up planet,
That could be.
and they want to do something about it.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting thought. It definitely adds a layer of social and cultural context to these findings.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've got age, we've got environmental values, we've got car ownership, all kind of swirling around in this mix.
Yeah.
Now, what about those different ways of presenting the emissions information, on those car labels? What did ALE reveal about that?
This is where it gets really cool. So remember those labels showing the leafy trees
Yeah.
and highlighting those positive environmental impacts?
Mm-hmm.
Well, ALE lets us actually measure that impact. We can see how much more likely people are to choose an EV when they see those kind of positive, feel-good labels.
Wow. So it's not just a hunch, it's backed up by data.
It is. It really is. And it just reinforces how powerful storytelling and framing can be when you're trying to shape people's choices.
It's like you can give people all the facts and figures in the world, but if you don't make them feel something, it's not going to stick.
Exactly. You got to appeal to their emotions,
Right.
their
Yeah.
values,
Right.
their desire to make a difference.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So let's switch gears a bit here
No.
and talk about the different types of electric vehicles.
Yeah.
You know, we've got the BEVs, which are fully electric, and then we've got the PHEVs, which are the plug-in hybrids.
Right.
What did this study tell us about, the folks who are drawn to each of those?
So they actually built separate models to try to predict who's more likely to buy each type, and there were some interesting distinctions.
Okay.
So PHEV buyers, they tend to be more price sensitive overall. We kind of talked about that.
Yeah.
But that price sensitivity, it really kicks in for folks who aren't super concerned about climate change.
Okay, so if you're not really in it for reducing emissions, you're going to be looking for the most affordable option.
Yeah.
And PHEVs, they do tend to come with a higher price tag than just your average gas guzzler.
Right. Exactly. But for folks who are concerned about climate change, that price matters a little less. They're willing to pay a bit more for those environmental benefits of a PHEV, even if it's not fully electric.
So it's like they're kind of dipping their toes in the electric waters, trying to find that balance
I love that analogy.
between their values and their budget.
Yeah, yeah. Now, BEV buyers, they seem to be a different breed.
Okay.
Their choices are really driven by their level of concern about climate change.
But the more they care about the planet, the more likely they are to just go all in on a BEV.
That's it. And here's the kicker. That holds true, even when you factor in things like income and education level.
Wow.
So it's not just about having the money to buy a BEV, it's about having that deep-seated commitment to make it a difference for the environment.
Yeah. It's about those values.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really powerful message for car manufacturers.
Right.
It's not enough to just build electric vehicles. You have to actually market them in a way that speaks to people's values.
You've got to make them feel good about their choice, like they're part of something bigger.
Yes, like they're part of a movement
Yeah, totally.
towards a more sustainable future.
Okay, so we've talked about how ALE can shed light on all these different factors, from price sensitivity
Mm-hmm.
to environmental values to the different types of EVs and who's buying them.
Yeah,
I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here.
we have.
But is there anything else? Is there like a missing piece of the puzzle here?
Well, all this research really kind of begs the question.
Okay.
What does it all mean for the future of the EV market?
Right, yeah. Like, what can we actually do with these insights?
And that's where the policy recommendations come in.
Okay.
And that's what we'll be talking about in part 3.
Ooh, I love a good cliffhanger. I can't wait to see what those recommendations are.
All right, stay tuned.
Okay, so we've been talking about who's buying electric vehicles and what's motivating their choices. But now the big question is, what do we do with all these insights?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
The researchers actually went a step further and offered some pretty concrete policy recommendations based on what they found.
Oh, cool. So they didn't just leave us hanging with all this data.
No, they didn't. And one of the things that really stood out to me was that simply making EVs cheaper isn't the silver bullet we might think it is.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it makes sense that price is a barrier, especially for folks who aren't as, gung-ho about the environmental stuff. But if it's not just about lowering prices, what are they saying we should do?
Well, they actually recommend this multi-pronged approach, right? It goes beyond just those financial incentives.
Okay.
For example, they talk a lot about the need for public education campaigns that really highlight the full range of benefits of EVs.
So not just hammering home the save money on gas message, but really showcasing those environmental perks, the convenience of charging at home, maybe even the lower maintenance costs.
Exactly. It's about painting the full picture, right?
Right.
Not just focusing on one or two things.
Yeah, it's about selling that feeling of driving an EV as much as the practical stuff.
Exactly. It's about reframing the narrative, right? And tapping into those deeper motivations that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. So, we talked about that climate change stage of change thing. and how people who are already taking action to reduce their emissions, they're more likely to buy EVs.
Exactly.
So how do we kind of nudge the folks who are maybe just starting to think about climate change?
Right.
How do we nudge them towards an EV?
Well, for the people who aren't already super motivated by the environmental piece,
Right.
those financial incentives like tax breaks and rebates,
Yeah.
those might be the most effective way to get their attention.
Yeah.
Make it so that an EV is actually the most financially attractive option.
Yeah, hit them where it hurts, right? The ball.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for folks who are already on board with the whole sustainability thing, then it's about focusing on convenience and accessibility.
Okay.
So, investing in public charging infrastructure, maybe giving EVs access to preferential parking.
Oh, okay.
Or even, some people have talked about dedicated lanes for EVs.
Oh, wow.
To kind of help with that whole, traffic congestion issue.
So you're saying make it easy, make it hassle-free.
Exactly.
Like it the most appealing option for people who are already, committed to a greener lifestyle.
You got it. And the really cool thing about this is it acknowledges that there's no one-size-fits-all.
Right.
We need to meet people where they are and appeal to their individual motivations.
It's like a targeted marketing campaign for a sustainable future.
I love that. And, this research, it has some pretty big implications, not just for policymakers, but also for the auto industry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, car companies are definitely paying attention to this whole shift towards electric.
Absolutely.
So what do they need to know? What do they need to be thinking about?
Well, I think the big takeaway for them is they need to really understand the values of their customers.
Right.
People are increasingly making choices based on their environmental impact, and car companies need to get that. They need to not only build EVs, but also market them in a way that resonates with those values.
So it's not enough to just slap an eco-friendly sticker on a car and call it a day.
It's got to be more than that.
You got to tell a story, create an experience, make people feel good about their choice.
Exactly. The car companies that can tap into that emotional connection, those are the ones that are going to succeed in the long run.
Yeah. It's like we've been saying, it's about more than just the car itself. It's about what it represents, the values it embodies, the kind of future it promises.
You said it perfectly. And, what's really exciting is that this whole shift towards EVs, it's happening on a global scale.
It is.
Now, this particular study, they focused on Canada.
Right.
But these insights, these policy recommendations, they're relevant for any country that's looking to accelerate EV adoption.
Yeah, it's a global movement,
100%.
towards a more sustainable future.
It is.
And it's fueled by individual choices and innovative technologies and hopefully smart policies.
Exactly. And I think that's a pretty hopeful note to end on.
Yeah, it is. This whole deep dive has given me a whole new perspective on the EV landscape and the potential it holds.
Me too.
So if you're interested in learning more about this, we encourage you to check out the original research paper.
Yeah, definitely.
You can find a link to it in the show notes.
And be sure to join us next time.
Yes.
For another deep dive into a topic that's shaping our world.
Until then, keep asking questions and keep learning.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.